Now that you've found your wounded inner child, it's time to offer nurturing, protection, and new permissions. In this episode, I'll suggest 10 new permissions to increase your enjoyment of life and offer instruction on how you can give yourself a new childhood. Also, I'll discuss ways to break free from your assigned roles in the family system and champion your inner child to be its true self. Hello everybody, welcome to the show. Today we're going to talk about championing the child. That's a word that just appeals to my child. The idea of having a champion. That when you were little you had a champion, somebody that would stand up for you, somebody that would take care of you, somebody that would fight for you. So I was messing around when I was working on inner child, and that word just came to me. It came from my child. Now, in order to explain it to you, though, and to show you where I think it fits in what I call the journey to wholeness, I want to show you something that I showed in an earlier program, which is what I'm calling, for lack of a better expression, the journey to wholeness. And I suggested when I presented this the first time that the journey to wholeness involves, first of all, coming out of our delusion and our denial. You've got to break out of the delusion and the denial. Families, dysfunctional families, are in delusion. There's a sense in which everybody in the family's in a trance, and there's a denial about what's really going on. Or there's a denial about the seriousness. You'll hear a family, two brothers, 35 years later, going, is Dad still drinking? Did Dad drink again? Yeah, Dad quit. Well, he started back. See, nobody thinks about doing an intervention, that Dad's a sick alcoholic. Let's do an intervention. Let's deal with this. Let's deal with it. Functional families deal with problems. So we've got to break the delusion and denial in order to take action and change behavior. Sometimes you need what Jane Moss calls a cognitive life raft. You need to understand something. You need some awareness. And I hope that that's one of the things this kind of series and the family series can bring to people, is awareness. But take action may mean going to a 12-step group. It definitely means changing your behavior. It may mean that I really behavior modify. I just break patterns of what I was doing. Or it may mean going to therapy. Or it may mean stopping doing something. It may mean getting into some kind of support group. I'll say some more about that in another program. But I think people need support groups. I think we all need networks of support. That could be whatever it is for you. It could be your church group or your synagogue group or a therapy group or a 12-step group or just a group that's gotten together that supports each other. For me, the most important thing is that it's a non-shaming group. It's a place where you can really be who you are, and you can be validated for the very one you are. Then we spent a lot of time in previous programs talking about this feeling work and reclaiming the inner child. Championing falls into this section of what Wayne Kritzberg, this is a model I've taken from Wayne Kritzberg. Cognitive work, or the word that I like is corrective experience. It's like we've been looking at these developmental stages. Did you get your infancy needs met? Did you get your toddler needs, your preschool needs, your school age needs? And for a lot of us, we didn't get those needs met. In fact, what we've been doing is exploring our past. We've been exploring the stages that we've taken to get here. Here's a wonderful quotation from T.S. Eliot. We shall not cease our explorations, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. That is, by exploring these childhood developmental stages, we understand our childhood for the first time. And we understand the impact that it's made on our life. And we begin to get awareness about what we need to do. So, in a sense, what we've been following is that pattern. The cognitive work, the corrective experience are now what we have to do about it. So championing is a form of corrective experiencing or reparenting the inner child. Now, one of the problems right off the bat is that, how do I know how to reparent the inner child? All I know is what I learned from my parents. And so we've got to do something. We've got to use our adult to get information and to find ways to nurture ourselves effectively. And a lot of what I'm going to share with you in this program and another program where we'll talk about championing is really a combination of a lot of the things that are available in therapy right now. There's a lot of people doing cognitive work, challenging belief systems, learning values clarification, learning new skills, communication skills. We'll talk about all of that. And spirituality, in my opinion, expanded lifestyle, whatever you consider your higher power to be, that's the fruits of the journey, to have an inner life. And we'll be looking at that in some other programs. But this is a little formula that I use. Eric Berne said, in order for people to change, Eric Berne was the founder of transactional analysis. He said, in order for people to change, you need a new source of potency. See, because that little child in you doesn't want to leave mom and dad. It's scary, and the more abused you've been, the harder it is to leave. One of the characteristics of a functional family is that people get to leave. One of the dominant characteristics of a dysfunctional family is that people cannot leave it. You're bonded to it. Alice Miller calls it bond permanence, because you don't have a self. You don't have a self, so you can't get out of it. So it's enormously important that we get a new source of potency. Now, the new source of potency that I'm going to encourage you to have is yourself, is your own adult part. And let your adult, use all your strength and skills to get some new knowledge and some new skills and be willing to have some new skills. With that, with our adult as a new source of potency, we can give the child new permissions. See, one of the reasons the child keeps the old patterns is that the child is afraid to disobey the old rules. So I'm going to talk about breaking some rules and some new rules, giving your inner child some new rules. Protection, we're going to have to protect the inner child. And then practice new kinds of skills. Like I've had to learn to practice saying no. I've had to learn practicing expressing anger. I've learned communication skills. I've worked on learning communication skills. So we'll talk about these two in another program, but today I want to talk about potency and permission. And the basic idea here is this, that while I was over here, my child, I began this whole series talking about how the child contaminates my life. By reclaiming the child, what I do is this. I come over here, and in a sense, this is not accurate, but it's like I've got the child outside here. I've got him right here. And like he's with me all the time, and I'm aware of him. He doesn't like workshops, for example. But I have to really take care of him. I got on an airplane one night coming home from Los Angeles. I just started crying. I was so tired and worn out. It was him. He's going, hey, man, you're killing us. We got to do something about this. When are we going to play golf? When are we going fishing? When are we going to play? So it's real important. This idea of championing is that I'm his champion now. And as an adult, I can do things for him. Marion Woodman, who's a wonderful Jungian analyst, says that we have to discipline our inner child in order to allow the spiritual power of the child to emerge. We have to be willing to discipline the child. So part of corrective experience, or part of championing, is literally disciplining the child. Like this child got me in a lot of trouble. This wounded child got me in a lot of trouble. This is the part of me that's the addict, because this is the wounded child. This is the child that never got his needs met, so he lives with scarcity. There's never going to be enough. There isn't enough love to go around. There isn't enough food to go around. There isn't enough stuff to go around. I got to get more. I got to get more stuff. There's not, if you like another presenter better than me, that's terrible, because there isn't enough love or admiration to go there. There isn't enough codependence to go around. So I've got to tell him, hey, it's okay. I'm going to be here for you, and I'm going to help you. So one of the things that I do with my child is, see, it's real important that you understand that you would be enormously impressive to a 5-year-old. Not that you're not impressive, period. But think of how impressive you would be if I said, okay, every one of you is going to get to take a little 5-year-old home with you and tell this little kid some stuff about you that would impress a 5-year-old. See, we're establishing you as a source of potency. So, your adult has survived. Remember that. Virginia Satir used to say to groups, everything you've done up to now has worked. You're not dead. Everything you've done up to now has worked. So your adult knows how to survive. It's the little child that is terrified of abandonment. It's the little child that doesn't think there's enough. So I've got to really pay attention to him. And then, so like one of the things that I like to do is I like to make some lists of things that would impress him. Like I have 2 cars, 2 convertibles. Now I was doing this one day, and I thought, I'm going to impress little John. Tell him I have 2 convertibles. Actually, he bought them both. So that's not as impressive as I thought it was going to be. But some things that you have a house, or you have a place you live, you have a bank account. I mean, tell him what, you may not think you make a lot, but tell him what that is in candy bars, or tell him what that is in ice cream. Now you may not want to let him have all the ice cream or her have all the ice cream they want. But it's the idea. You get the idea that you would be very potent to a child. Now, other sources of potency. So we're looking at the things and making lists of things that I have that are very potent to a child. Another source of potency that I believe that all children believe in is a higher power. I can't tell anybody about God as I understand God. I think one of the worst things that's ever happened to any of us is that we've been brainwashed about somebody else's God. And that each one of us need to make that journey our own journey. That is a uniquely private journey. One of the great angers of my life is that I was so indoctrinated as a child that in some ways I was getting answers to questions that I'd never asked, nor didn't even know what the question was. And suddenly I had all these answers. And I think everybody's got to come to some point in their life where they give up their mother and father's God. That's when spirituality begins, when we move beyond that. But higher power, I think higher power is a very important source of potency for the child, the HP, the higher power, whatever you call that. That may be Yahweh, it may be Jesus to somebody, it may be Allah, it may be the force, it may be energy. Whatever it is, though, kids believe in a higher power. Immanuel Kant, talked about standing there staring out at a starry night and saying, how could anyone disbelieve that there was something greater than themselves? And my belief is that when we're restored to healthy shame, which is the part of you that knows your limits, that you can't not believe in something greater than yourself. In fact, it was Nietzsche, the German philosopher, who said, shame, healthy shame, is the source of spirituality. meaning that it's the feeling that lets us know our limits. And that therefore, when I know my limit, I know that there's something more powerful than me. So the idea of potency is to make lists of your kinds of strength, of whatever that higher power is, to acknowledge that, or if you have a prayer life, if you have a religious life, whatever it is you have, it's important to bring that child in on that. Let that child be a part of that. Let that child understand that it's very, very crucial for the child to believe that there's a source of potency in life. And I believe that children believe in something greater than themselves. They're natural believers. So potency, another source of potency that I use is I have intellectual mothers and fathers. Like I just quoted Marion Woodman. I would think of her as an intellectual mother, not in terms of age, but in terms of simply that she's been a very nurturing source. Alice Miller would be one of my intellectual mothers that I believe is potent. I've quoted Jacques Maritain. I haven't in this series, but he's a French philosopher that was very important to me in my life. Robert Bly, the poet, is a very important source to me. I love his poetry. I love the way that, that he can touch the feelings in me. Virginia Satir, very important source. So I use those people as a source of potency also. That they represent people that I can trust. I trust their honesty. And I think everybody's got to develop that for themselves. Now, another very crucial thing as a source of potency for our child is to redo childhood scenes. There is a very powerful modality of therapy called neuro-linguistic programming. Some of you may know about it. It was a body that was founded by John Grinder and Richard Bandler and Leslie Bandler and Judith Delosier. They began doing this work watching Milton Erickson work, watching Fritz Perls work, watching Virginia Satir work. They began to say, these people are like wizards. They seem to know how to do things that a lot of the rest of us don't know how to do. They seem to have this ability to touch people in very powerful ways. Let's go look at them and see what they do. And so they developed a whole model out of the work of Erickson, Milton Erickson, and others. One of their techniques is called changing your personal history. It's literally a technique of going back into a childhood scene and redoing that scene. And it's based on the cybernetic principle that it's all in there. It's all imprinted in our brain. Now, all through the previous programs, I've been talking to you about governing scenes or childhood scenes, how those scenes get imprinted in our brain, and how we continue to act those scenes out. The guy at Michigan State, Gershon Kaufman, who's written a book on shame, he does a lot of this kind of work. Going back into scenes and redoing those scenes. And the cybernetic principle is that you can create fantasies and scare yourself with them. Every single one of us have done that. You start catastrophizing. You know, I've got to go to the bank Saturday and I'm going to ask for a loan. And, oh, what are you so upset about? Well, I've got to go to the bank Saturday and ask for a loan. Well, what's your fantasy? Well, what do you mean, what's my fantasy? And then when I probe, the fantasy is you didn't get the loan. So you're fantasizing. See, Don Juan told Carlos Castaneda, you can make yourself happy or miserable. The amount of work is the same. You know, you can get on an airplane and say it's the safest I've been all day, or maybe, now you got to be good to do this, maybe, just maybe, there's one die-hard Japanese kamikaze pilot out there. Now you have to be really messed up to get into that kind of fantasy, but catastrophizing. So we can create scenes. In fact, we don't even have to create them. They're already in there. Most people can create sexual fantasies and have literally physical arousal. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on this one. But if we can do that, then we can create certain kinds of inner strengths of scenes that we already have. So I want to show you how to do this. I want you to select a painful scene. Now, if you're an incest victim, don't select that scene, because the voltage of that is just too painful. You need much more careful work with incest and physical violence. And so this kind of a technique is not for that kind of violation. But it's for, I think of a time when I was, pulled by the ear in church, when it was actually my buddy who was doing it. And it was very humiliating. I got drug out and down the aisle. I was forced to leave, and I was ashamed, and I was blushing. Painful scene. And it was not handled well. The whole point of it was not handled well. This was a young clergyman, and he was very authoritarian. So I might think of that scene, okay? So right now I want everybody to think of a scene. You got punished for what your sister did, or what your brother did, or you got humiliated in public, or you were humiliated at school. Just take a minute. People at home watching this, just take a minute. Think of a scene. And then once you've got the scene, what are some adult strengths? And this works real well with childhood scenes. What are some adult strengths that you now have that if you had them then? For example, I have less fear now. I would have said, wait a minute, brother, what are you jerking me out of church for? I have my anger available to me now. See, as a child, I was terrified of any adult. I was taught to obey any adult simply because they were an adult. And anger was one of the 7 deadly sins, so I'm not about to express anger. So I'm also more articulate now. So I might think of articulation, anger, and courage. I'm not afraid. So what you then do is you close your eyes and you think of a time when you were angry. You're expressing anger, and I like to do it in a respectful way, meaning that I'm saying what I feel, what I see and hear, what I want, and expressing it, but I'm not calling the person names. But I'm being very clear that I'm angry. So think of a time that you had one of the strengths that you needed in this scene. And then you stack the positive anchor. Like I would think of a time when I was articulate and I'd touch my thumb to my finger. That's called a kinesthetic anchor. That is, I'm making a touch like a Pavlov signal. Everybody has anchors. For example, you're driving in your car and you hear a piece of music. And you remember your 7th grade boyfriend or girlfriend, or you remember somebody you went to a dance with. Or you hear a holiday music. Suddenly you feel the blues, or some people have a lot of holiday blues. But you understand what I'm saying? It's like a sound will trigger a memory, or a face. Or Steve Halpern and I do a thing in our workshops where he plays music and holds people's arms, and certain music weakens you, and certain other sound strengthens you. So you can imagine living by an airport, what that might do to you. But soundscapes and healthy sound, and Stephen does a lot of this with his music. But when we were doing the exercise, I started thinking of let's say, a father's voice. What that might do to you. And let's say you were around a man that had a voice that sounded just like your father. What might happen to you? See, that's an anchor. That's like firing an anchor. So what I would do is I would close my eyes and I would think of a time when I was articulate and I would touch. I would think of a time when I was angry and I would touch. That's called stacking the anchor. And you don't have to have 3. You can do 1. You can do 2. But that would be my positive anchor. Here's my anger. Here's my articulation. Then you think about the painful scene, and when you feel just a little bit of it, you anchor it over here. So this is your X anchor. So I've got a Y anchor and an X anchor, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and fire them together. I'm going to fire them together. I'm going to imagine that I could take all these strengths back into childhood. And the way I do it is I make the anchor with this fist, and then I walk back to the past with my child. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and we redo the scene. But it's like he's got his champion right behind him. And I got all these strengths. I got all these strengths. So do you get the idea of what it is to redo a childhood scene? So when you fire X and Y, the thesis is that those neurological imprints are coming together, but you're putting new imprints with that old governing scene. You're putting new imprints with the old governing scene. And when people do this exercise, it's very powerful. And then we do a thing called future pace. You go into the future where this kind of feeling. Let's say you have a boss that reminds you of your father. And every time you get around him, you get resourceless. You go into this kind of resourceless feeling. By working out an earlier scene, you can future pace to that scene with your boss and handle it a lot better. Now this is not magic, and it's real important that you understand it's not. But it's very powerful. And it's a way that I can use my adult to go back and redo childhood memories. We've started talking about how the child contaminates our life. And then I've gone through all the developmental stages. So now we've reclaimed the child. We begin to champion the child. I do think it's too late to have a happy childhood. I don't think it's never too late. I think it's too late. That a lot of us didn't have a happy childhood, and we have to grieve it. But I think there's a lot you can do about those old memories. You can add resources by doing this kind of a scene. By taking a painful scene, by thinking of strengths that you now have, anchoring them, saying to your little child, okay, let's go back, going back to church, and I stand right there with him with my hand on his shoulder as he says to that brother, this guy that was a brother, a Christian brother, and he says, listen, I'm not going to let you haul me out of church and humiliate me in front of these. I'm just a little boy. I'm giving you back your shame. And then he and I walk out of there. And you can play some kind of champion song if you want to when you walk out of there. But it's like that little kid was powerless, you see. And it's like when some of you may have seen the original Pain program where Kip Flock stood behind Cindy and he gave her strength and protection while she expressed her anger. Well, that's the idea here. Now, another kind of thing is to give this child, see, remember, you're the new parent now. And you're going to give this child some new nurturing rules. This child needs new rules. And a lot of these old rules are you can't express your anger, you can't express your feelings. The old rules are no talk rules. If you have something unpleasant to say, don't say anything at all. See, we have to tell the child, no, we have to deal with things. Remember, functionality is dealing. If you're angry, it needs to be dealt with. If you're sad, it needs to be dealt with. If you're afraid, it needs to be dealt with. If you're happy, it needs to be dealt with. So, the first rule is that it's okay to trust your eyes and ears. Now, many of you have been watching the programs that we've done here. You've seen what we call the validation in the sharing. When somebody shares their feelings and they get validated, I really saw your sadness. Boy, I really hear the anger in your voice. See, because a lot of us grew up in families, you walked in and you said, you saw tears coming out of your mother's eyes, and you said, Mama, what's the matter? She said, nothing, go to your room. You're going, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. I could have sworn she was crying. You know, the fighting, you heard fighting in the other room. You went in the room, what's the matter? Nothing, we're having a conversation, go back to your room. Quit being such a busybody. So you quit trusting your eyes and ears. The emperor has no clothes on. And everybody's pretending like he does. Everybody's pretending like Dad's a saint. He's really an alcoholic. You know, like I do a whole workshop on finding your family secrets. And boy, the people you want to look for are the saints. Look out for those saints. Those ones that everybody had on a pedestal. Go check them out again. So those people need to be looked at. See, what happens when you grow up in a dysfunctional family, you quit trusting your own eyes and ears. You quit trusting your own experience. So it's very important for me, if I'm seeing something, if I'm hearing something, to check it out. And you know, you could be in another crazy situation. That's why you need a support group. Like, I have a male support group, and I check out a lot of stuff with them. You know, look, I want to do a reality check. And I'll go to them and I'll talk about what I'm feeling, and I get a reality check. It's okay to think what you think. Okay to think what you think. How many of you had a thought as a child and they said, "Where'd you get an idea like that?" Why, that's the stupidest damn thing I've ever heard. And so, woo, you know, I'm a dummy. You know, who you been hanging out with? Don't you come in this house anymore. You're not sitting at this table thinking like that. You have a right to think what you think. You only have to take the consequences of it. You have a right to feel and express your feelings. See, we've been talking about that in other programs. Everything we've been talking about in Reclaiming the Child is that it's okay to feel what you feel. Feelings are not right or wrong. They're simply what they are. And it's okay to express them. That's the way you stay sane and you stay connected with yourself. If I feel sad and you say, "Well, there's nothing to be sad about," what are you sad about? That's crazy making. That's crazy making. You have nothing to be afraid. What, are you afraid? What are you afraid of? There's nothing to be afraid of. Woo, I'm really afraid. My heart's going bloom, bloom. You know, but you're telling me there's not that. That's crazy making. So, want what you want. It's okay to want what you want. I was told anytime I desired something that was evil. That you shouldn't want things. And a lot of kids in poor families get that because it's so painful for their parents. And I understand that. But it is okay to want. You can tell your child it's okay for us to want, to dream, to desire. As a little boy standing on Fairview Street, I dreamed of this kind of day. I dreamed of a day when my book would be on the New York Times. I dreamed of this kind of stuff. And a lot of those dreams are things that I really, at some deep intuitive sense, believed were going to happen. And I want people to hear that, because it's important to have your dreams and your desires. It's important to be connected with that light. See, the life energy, the root chakra energy is desire. It's desire. And that's so important. That's our will to live. And so we need to give that child permission for that. And hey, it's okay to play and have fun. This is not a valley of tears. You know, I was raised with prayers that said, this is a valley of tears. Let's get out of here as fast as we can. You know, the reward is in heaven. Well, you know, a part of me believes that with all my heart. There's another part of me that ain't so sure. I want to hear a guy singing Hi-Ho when I die. That's for sure. I want to hear that. So I don't know about. I do believe there's something more. I just don't want to make the journey, if you know what I mean. But the idea is that it's okay. Let's have some. Hey, this is supposed to be a celebration. I remember reading Nietzsche. I wrote my master's thesis on Nietzsche. And I read this passage in there, and he said, I could only believe in a God who dances. If these people want me to believe in their God, they're going to have to sing me better songs. They're going to have to look more like people who've been saved. They're going to have to wear on their countenance the joy of the Beatitudes. You know, and it was a very harsh indictment. And it was a big judgment. But I love the idea of a God who dances, of a celebration, of life being wonderful. One of our other programs, we talked about the wonderful child. In a subsequent program, I'm going to talk about finding your wonder child. That's that naive, optimistic little person that just loves life. I mean, kids can play all day. And there's a part of us that wants to play. And we need to give ourselves permission to play and have fun. You have a right to have all the fun you can, to just enjoy. And also, we have to give this kid permission for sexual play. Now, within your moral limits, please don't misunderstand that, somebody. Within your moral limits, It is really great to be able to play, and one form of adult play is sexual play. One of the places that many of us have been shamed is sexually. We have massive sexual addiction in this culture because of the sexual shame. That so many people have absolutely been decimated about their sexuality. You know, the day I found my nose, it was rejoicing in the family. That, you know, there was this, they were calling in neighbors saying, "Show them your nose. I'm a little bitty kid. I'm cute. Nose." They think that's adorable. Then one day I found my elbow. Let's show so-and-so your elbow. And then I found my navel one day. And they wanted me to show the navel. And I was really knocking people out. And then one Sunday, and I thought, look, man, if the nose got him, this is really going to get him. Never have I been taken out of a room faster. And this big giant looking at me and saying, "Don't you ever take that out again!" So we wonder why disorder of desire is the #1 sexual problem in marriage. So I mean, you grow up in this family that has no genitals. And this is very, very scary. Because look, the mobile, you remember the mobile? Sometimes the mobile is affected when nothing's there. See, when people are denying. If I came out on this stage and I started walking around with this manila folder strapped to my groin, and you're going, "Hi folks, how you going tonight?" What is the first thing you would notice? See, when you come out of a family that has no sexuality in it, that is going to impact you very, very powerfully. So it's very important that we work on giving that child permission, exploring that in a healthy way, in a very protected way, but in a way that allows you to really develop. Now, here's some more rules. See, these are some new rules to teach your child. It's crucial to delay gratification, to know your limits. This is Scott Peck wrote a book that was on the New York Times, for 3 years, that starts with life as problems, and the only way to solve life problems is with discipline. And the first thing, and that discipline is a technique to enhance life's pleasure. And that one of the parts of discipline is delaying gratification. See, delaying gratification means that I can enjoy certain things more. Most children from dysfunctional family have trouble delaying gratification because of scarcity. That there's this emptiness inside of us, and we don't think there's going to be enough. Boy, I better get it now, because there may never be any more. There may never be any more love. There may never be any more sex. There may never be any more money. So we got to say, "Look, you got me now, little John, and I'm going to protect us, and I'm going to find resources for us. I'm going to be our champion." Develop a conscience. Be responsible. We need a conscience. I didn't have a conscience. What I had was a bunch of parent tapes. I had a bunch of voices in there telling me what I should, ought, and must do. And a part of me was rebelling against that, but that was that do your duty, do your duty, do your duty. And what I'm developed now in my life is a conscience, that conscientia. What that means is that there are some things that I stand for, that I will stand for no matter what. I have values that I stand for. I don't know, I don't have a lot of them, but I have some. And a value is something that you've chosen. Sidney Simon and others have taught us. You've chosen it. You've chosen it from alternatives. You've considered the consequences. You prize and cherish it. You're willing to publicly proclaim it. You act on it, and you act on it repeatedly. That it needs 7 things to be a value. It's chosen from alternatives. You understand the consequences of it. You act on it. You act on it repeatedly. You prize and cherish it, and you will publicly proclaim it if necessary. That's a value. Now, I sat down one day and took all the stuff that I believed and applied those to them, and it was frightening. Because it was like I just had all this bunch of parent tapes. I didn't have values. Tell the truth at any cost. That's another one of the things Scott Peck talks about, telling the truth at any cost. So many of us learned to lie when it was just as easy to tell the truth, because we were brought up in these deceptive systems that had all these lies going. I have found that the more I tell the truth, just the easier my life is. The closer people get to me, the more vulnerable I am, the more I have friends and I bond with people, and I don't have to pretend, I don't have to play the nice guy, people-pleasing act. Now, believe me, I don't do this all the time. I get into my act. I was playing golf the other day, and a guy got in our fairway and was holding us up, and I was running around muttering curses. And then when we got to the clubhouse, the guy came up and said, "I'm sorry I held you up." And I said, "It's okay, we wanted to wait." And I was playing golf with my buddy Michael, and he was pretending like he was vomiting over in the bush. See, I was in my people-pleasing act. So I don't mean that I do it all the time, but to tell the truth. Be reasonable, but challenge your crazy thinking, all or nothing. You're single, you go out on a date, they don't call you back. You don't have to give your body to science over that. Not everybody's going to like you. It's not all or nothing. If every gal I ever go out with doesn't call, every guy doesn't call me back, then I must not be okay. We've got to learn that, life is, we've got to be reasonable, and awfulizing and catastrophizing. I have to say, whoa, John, whoa, let's think about this. Let's get a reality check here, because I can go crazy. There was a lot of illness in my family people were very concerned about illness, and boy, I can go crazy knowing it's it. This is it, the big C. I'm having cancer, I'm having the heart attack, and so I have to really be careful. Problems are natural. I've talked about that all through here. Functional families deal. Mistakes are teachers. Our mistakes are our best teachers. The worst thing that ever happened to me is the best thing that ever happened to me. Now, one other kind of potency that is enormously important is to go back. In an earlier program, I promised you that we were going to look at these family system rigid roles and give you, a way to look at those, because you see, I was killing myself as a caretaker. I'm very tired right now of making, these programs and doing what I've been doing lately. It's been very tiring, but I have a lot of fun planned down the line here. And I've learned to take care of myself. I'm learning how to really take care of myself. See, there's been a lot of bad press about codependency, and people saying, well, if you open the door for somebody, you're codependent, and what's the matter with these people? No one has ever said that caring for someone is codependent. What codependency is caring for someone at the expense of yourself. You do not need to be loved, Joe Cordero says, not at the cost of yourself. I cannot love you if I don't love me. So it's enormously important for me. It's been enormously important that I change this caretaker role, that I change this star role. Now, in lots of ways, I'm a star, but I'm not half as attached to this as I once was, and as I thought I might be. I'm tired of hotel rooms, and there's a loneliness in doing what I do. So it's not as glamorous. There's a commitment that I personally have made to the work of this series, and to the work that I did in the family series. And my commitment is clear, and I know what the limits of it are, and I know the place where I'm going to slow down with it, and that's been very important to me. Lost child, if you're a lost child, you need to do something about that role, because you're staying loyal to your family by acting out that role. It's very important that we look at scapegoats. Scapegoats feel bad. Usually they're carrying a lot of the family pain. What I've found is the scapegoat is often the most sensitive person in the whole family. The one that has the deepest feelings, that's been carrying mother and daddy. This kid may be acting out mother and daddy's anger. This kid may be getting in trouble all the time, acting out the loneliness and the pain in this family. Being a superachiever, believing that you don't matter unless you're a superachiever. So what do we do about this? When, first thing you do is find out what your roles were. It's enormously important that you know what your roles were, and that you get it that these are false selves, that these are all cover-ups for shame in a dysfunctional family. That this is the way that I learned to matter. Remember I said every child wants to matter. How can I matter in this family? By being a caretaker. How can I matter in this family? By being the president of the class. But in many, many ways, those weren't chosen roles. Now, what I'm doing now is chosen. Writing books, doing what I'm doing in my life is chosen. For the last 6 years, my life has been my choice, not a multi-generational accident. Now, it took me to 51 to get here. But in that sense, it's never too late. Don't get into that bag that it's too late for me. It is not too late. It is not too late to have your own life. And you don't have your own life when you're in a lost child, superachiever, any of these roles that basically are there to keep the family system together. That's what these roles are. They're the family system roles. They're the way that the family stays enmeshed. So here are some of the things that we can do about these roles. It's like the first thing to do is to decide what your role was or your roles. And often people have more than one role. For example, I'm a star, I'm a caretaker, I'm a superachiever, I'm a victim, I'm an addict. See, addict is learned behavior. I've said this over and over again in previous programs. When you come out of a dysfunctional family where there's a lot of abuse, you're being trained in addiction. You're being trained in power, control, secrecy, shame, fear, distrust, the numbing out of feelings and distance. That's exactly what you learn with abuse. And that's what sets you up for addiction. So addict was one of my roles. See, as I'm learning to be intimate, that doesn't mean I don't have the alcohol genetics or that I'm going back to drinking. That absolutely doesn't mean that. I wouldn't want to. I have no desire to. And I think I'm, a recovering alcoholic. And that this isn't something you go back to. But when I put the cork on the bottle, December the 11th, 1965, 10 years later, I was still an addict. I was still into intimacy dysfunction. I still didn't know how to have a relationship. See, remember that an addiction is a dysfunctional relationship. I know people who go to bed with their food at night. It's a relationship. It's a love relationship. Cocaine, we describe drugs in terms of a woman's name or whatever. So these addictions are very, very powerful relationships, and they're damaging relationships. They're life-damaging relationships. So we want to get it that these things are all learned. So first thing to do is write out all your roles. And then it's very important to decide which was the most important way that you learned to matter. See, like usually you'll have the most significant role. What was the most significant role you played in your family? Like mine was not star. Star was a role that was more about giving the family system dignity. See, it was an alcoholic family. My dad was gone very early on. We didn't have a car, but I was always the class president. And I was always the captain of the baseball team. See, I was the star. And so that could give my family a sense of dignity. Now, I want you to notice that any of you who are stars, that this may seem like a good deal, but it really isn't such a good deal. That you're being used for the covert or overt needs of the family system. You're being used for your family system. So that's the problem. Has that role helped your family? That's the first question to ask yourself. Has the role that you played in that family helped the family? And we want that little kid part of you to understand that. Has your being a caretaker really helped your mom? Is your mom in recovery? Is she, in fully functional in the journey to wholeness? Or your dad? Or your sister? Or your brother? By you being whatever you were? Or you being the scapegoat? Now, for some of you, you may all be in recovery, and that's great. You maybe all be functional. That's great. But for most of us, the role has not helped the family at all. It has not helped our family at all. Then what feelings did you have to give up to play that role? See, as a star, what feelings can't I have? What would happen if Superman, flew into, where does Superman fly? Wherever he flies into. And he said, all of a sudden he started crying. He said, I'm not facing Lex Luthor today. I just can't do it. I'm tired of it. Or Batman, or what? I mean, star, da da da. I am here. See, we can't be afraid. So what happens when you're afraid? You pretend like you're not afraid. So do you understand that the incredible thing about these roles is they take away your authentic self? What feelings did you have to give up to be a rebel? What feelings did you have to give up? Because remember, underneath the role are your real feelings. Is your authentic self, is your inner child. So that's another thing that we want to look at. What feelings are lost by me being in this role? Then what are the life-damaging consequences? Man, I was killing myself as a caretaker. I was counseling 80 people a week. I would be so tired when I'd go home at night. It was like if I wasn't taking care of people, I don't matter. I have to do this. And some of you know about this role. Or you may be killing yourself by being a lost child. You're always on the sidelines of life. You never let yourself, you won't go anywhere. You won't come out of hiding because you're too scared. You won't go and meet anybody. You're lonely. You're hurting. See, that role has cost you. Rebel, you're still rebelling. You just lost your 87th job. And you don't get it that you're still fighting your father. That you're still in the family. And that role is costing you your life. Or you're still a surrogate spouse. So you can't make it with any woman. You can't be committed to any woman because you're still married to your mother. No man has ever measured up to your dad. I mean, Mr. Wonderful, who actually was using you for his own loneliness. See, those roles are life-damaging. My being a caretaker and a surrogate, and some of those roles have cost me 10 years in the monastery. Part of that's about that role. I would say in the last 5 years I've been able to really be intimate. It's taken me that long. So, wow! Has this baby had life-damaging consequences? What parts of the role do you want? What parts of the role do you like? Then keep those. I like giving care. I love the nurturing of this inner child work. But I'm not going to kill myself doing it. And then choosing some new behaviors. I've had a hard time letting people take care of me in my life. I'm being taken care of wonderfully doing this series, and I'm letting people take care of me. See, that's a new behavior. I'm going places where nobody knows me. That's a very important behavior for me sometime, in some context. I'm going places where I'm not known, where I can just be part of the group. That's a very important behavior for me. I want to read you something in closing this program. This is from Gail Goodwin's novel, The Finishing School. I got this quotation out of one of Marion Woodman's books. It's a wonderful, wonderful quotation. She says, there are two kinds of people. One kind you can tell just by looking at them at what point they congealed into their final self. You know that you can expect no more surprises from this person, that there will be no more adventure. The other kind keeps moving, keeps changing, making new trysts with life, and the motion of it keeps them young. See, I love that kind of idea. That when you're in a rigid role, you congealed into your final self a long time ago, and you're still acting out in loyalty to the system. So I want to make a decision. To be in a rigid family role is psychological death. It means that you're born and you've never lived. You go to your death like Willie Loman, never knowing who you are. See, what could be worse? To go through your life and never know who you are. Cardinal Newman, the great Cardinal Newman, once said, "I do not fear that I will die. I fear that I may never have begun to live." And that's what I'd like you to think about. So next time we'll talk about a couple more ways to champion your inner child. So we'll see you. Thank you.